Questions of much graver and universal interest occupy our minds today.
Hello, my name is Lieutenant Eric Schein. I'm a graduate of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point in New York. It is a sister academy to West Point and Annapolis and the Air Force Academy. I'm here to speak to you today about some very serious matters that you need to be aware of and take action to confront and to resist and to change. The U.S. Coast Guard is declaring itself to be a branch of military, a special branch of military that can prosecute civilians. And what is going on and has gone on more recently, you may remember the fires here in California on October or in the middle of and into late October, specifically October 23rd, 2007 is a very important date for myself. In that time period, a state of emergency was declared due to the fires. And because of that state of emergency, the United States government, or at least certain individuals within the United States government, have been carrying on military tribunals, military commissions, military trials of civilians, using United States military assets to charge and prosecute civilians and carry on these prosecutions under the cloak of a state of emergency. Now again, here in California, today, we are in another state of emergency. Last Thursday or last Friday, April, I believe it was the 11th, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I believe it was due to the home mortgage crises, declared a state of emergency. And lo and behold, Homeland Security, the U.S. Coast Guard, has yet again fired up its military tribunals, trying to use the language of the Military Commissions Act, Warner Defense Authorization Bill, H.R. 1955, and SB 1959 to, I'm trying to think of a proper way of putting this, to benefit the interest of foreign powers to our own here in the United States, to overturn and upend the U.S. Constitution and to place civilians under the authority and under the control of a branch of military. The U.S. Coast Guard is not supposed to be a branch of military. If you look at its history, you'll soon discover that the life-saving service, the lighthouse service, the what was called the revenue cutter service, or the revenue marine, which was started back just shortly after the Revolutionary War in 1782, was to collect tariffs from foreign trade, foreign cargo, foreign ships coming into the United States that ran the majority of our federal government up into the 1930s. And what is going on now, though, is that Admiral Allen, who is the current U.S. Coast Guard Commandant, who was the Vice Admiral who took over as an Admiral in a branch of military, who took over FEMA from Michael Brown, is now using the Coast Guard and its powers and authority, and bastardizing those powers and authority, and using it as, and even declaring it to be, a special branch of military that can carry on not just citing and arresting and issuing a summons for some kind of a violation, which would be a police activity, but to actually arrest and detain, investigate, prosecute, adjudicate civilians using military assets of the Judge Advocate General Corps of the Coast Guard. This is going on right now in the United States. This has been going on for the last 5 years. And now, not only from October 23rd, 2007, under that state of emergency, and now under the state of emergency with the home mortgage crisis, they believe that they can act under, even though our courts are still operating, that they can act under the cloak of this quote-unquote national emergency and carry on prosecution of civilians with military assets for absurd charges, and I'm speaking from personal experience, and I'm coming to you today not just because of my own situation, but to warn you, to tell you what is going on, to explain to you how gravely serious this is. There is a U.S. Supreme Court case precedence from 1957. It's called Reed versus Covert. And in there is a great deal of information, much of it even goes to NAFTA, and that any type of a international agreement is superseded by, and only because it is a creature of the Constitution, it is overridden by and controlled by the Constitution, because without the Constitution, there would be no international trade agreement like NAFTA. These individuals who are involved in my own situation and who are trying to use the military to impress and impose itself upon civilians, much like the North in our own Civil War used the military against the South, a law called Posse Comitatus was passed. Many of the individuals who are now involved in this, Senator Warner, he's come out with the Warner Defense Authorization Bill. Many of the individuals who have signed on to H.R. 1955, look it up, go to the internet. SB 1959, H.R. is House of Representatives bill, SB is Senate bill. Senate bill or SB 1959. There are many other issues that you need to and quickly start to learn about, because we are not only under martial law, which is fleeting and temporary. It's supposed to be for a couple days, a couple weeks, so that civil order is restored. The civil courts are back in operation. The fire departments are back in operation. The police are back in operation. And instead, we are and have been for minimally the last 5 years, going from my own personal experience with these military tribunals, we are and have been under a military dictatorship for minimally the last 5 years. March 1st, 2003 was when the Coast Guard moved into Homeland Security, and it took from the Department of Defense military law, Uniform Code of Military Justice, Title 10, which is, it is being applied in a Napoleonic fashion, even though now here in the United States, the presumption of innocence, even under military law, is the standard, is the constitutional standard. They are attempting to change this so that it is under Napoleonic law, and rather than being presumed innocent, you are now presumed, or will soon be presumed, as this program expands, if you do not take action now to confront it and help others like myself confront it, you will be presumed guilty, and you will have to prove your innocence rather than the prosecution prove your guilt. And we have that standard for a reason. Our founding fathers set that standard because of their own personal experience with the powers in Europe, the self-appointed royal families. And much of what is going on here in the United States today is coming from Europe. Not only England, Italy, Spain, Austria, Bavaria, Germany, and many other countries. If you looked at things like T-Mobile, it is a German corporation owned majority stake by the German government. The first two new national security cutters built by the Coast Guard that are loading in-close weapon systems and becoming a de facto Navy going for deep sea, deep water, are named the Bertholf and the Vosch, two good German names. When you start to look at this and analyze this, you can start to discern that there's a very strong European flavor to what is going on, much like when we complained about taxation without representation. We find ourselves, you know, under King George III, we now find ourselves in a very same position. And if you think that McCain or Obama or Clinton are going to change any of that, the only way that any of these three individuals will change it, and I see that we will be deeply ensconced in more wars, as John McCain has said, because when you look behind the system and what is going on with military tribunals of civilians and more, you start to see that all oversight has been taken away, been stripped from federal contracting. All you have to do is look at Halliburton, KBR, what's going on in the war in Iraq. The war in Iraq has taken longer than the entire World War theater from World War II. We entered the war in 1941. We exited the war. The war was over in 1945. We have been in Iraq longer than we have spent in World War II. World War II included many nations throughout the world. What is going on now, and I will make this very clear, is a movement from what the self-appointed royal families have been up to for quite some time in messing with foreign affairs, especially our own, is as they move from princely state to kingly state, from kingly state to state nation or territorial state, then from state nation to nation state, they carry on a change in title or change in government or change in state. And every time they do this, they wipe out the treasury, steal all the public trusts, break up the Commonwealth, and even go after private assets of individuals so that they cannot protect the nation state or the country. And now we are ensconced in what many declare to be a civil war here in the United States. And when you look at what happened in our own Civil War and foreign engagement or foreign involvement in that war, you can see the very same thing going on again today as they move us into the new state of the nation, which is the market state. And they are trying to change the Constitution, carry on a change in constitutional order, and they are doing this intentionally and rewriting the Constitution in allowing things like having a branch of military prosecute what that branch of military is declaring to be a civilian. For my warnings to the American people and my attempts to get out and to explain many of these issues of why the military is always supposed to be under the control of civilians and that civilians are never to be under the control of the military, and many other issues. The Coast Guard, under the Department of Homeland Security, it moved in March 1st of 2003 into Homeland Security, and 5 days later, as the very first case, brought charges against me. I have never worked in the Coast Guard, never served in the Coast Guard. I've never worked for the Coast Guard as a federal contractor. I went to a separate and distinct federal military service academy, Kings Point, where I come out with a naval commission, where I get a Defense Investigative Services background check to get into the academy, where I had come out with a secret clearance that was elevated to top secret. I've worked for General Electric throughout the United States and overseas. I've worked at Pearl Harbor at the naval base there as a federal contractor for American Management Systems. I have worked at the subbase in San Diego, Military Sealift Command, Naval Fleet Auxiliary Force, as a civil service port engineer. I've not only worked as a port engineer also over at Pearl, but also worked as a naval officer, working on some of the equipment that we worked on coming in was nuclear subs, when the shipyard and Navy Yard was still, much more of a public asset. Many of these things are being broken down and sold off to not only self-interested parties, much like the robber barons from the late 1800s, involving our own railroads and property and more, but they are being sold off to these individuals, these self-interested individuals here in the United States, and to themselves and others overseas that they are working with. And they are intent on breaking down the constitutional order here in the United States. They are intent on breaking down the rule of law. They are intent on breaking down the American people, just like they do when we enter into a military academy, where they take all our constitutional rights away from us, or so they tell us, and they give them back to us as privileges, where they shave our heads, have us walk 6 inches from the wall, and reward us at the end of the week with a soda if we behave. That is exactly what they want to do to the American people. That is exactly what they are doing to the American people. And this is not just coming from Wall Street. When you look at who J.P. Morgan is that is tied to Bear Stearns now, J.P. Morgan came to the United States at the beginning of the American Civil War, set up a financial services bank here in the United States, profited off of the war, and he was funded and backed and underwritten by his father, who was a banker in England. The very same thing that Bear Stearns has done now, or I'm sorry, what J.P. Morgan has done now with Bear Stearns is the very same thing that they did when he's dead now, of course, and his heir apparents have taken over the corporation. Back in the Civil War, though, he came over and did the very same thing that was carried on with Bear Stearns with some investment and financial firms at the same time. J.P. Morgan also started General Electric, which is the 5th largest corporation in the world that now owns NBC. And you wonder why you can't get the truth on NBC, because it is owned and controlled by foreign interests, many of which are based in England. And you find that we are in the same position that we were several hundred years ago, and it is not Wall Street, it is not corporations, it is not just about money, it is about foreign control of our country, something that we had a Declaration of Independence for and toward, and a Constitution, and a system of rule and law that went to self-governance that is being overridden. Today I received, and I want to get into this real quick, it's a status notice and order, and this is coming from the United States of America, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, United States Coast Guard. The complainant is the Coast Guard versus myself. Eric Norman Shine is the respondent. The Coast Guard is using assets that are intended for its own people only to prosecute Coast Guard personnel. I've never served, and again, military law, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, is for men and women in uniform. That's why it's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It was also called the Uniform Code of Military Justice because it's supposed to apply to all branches of the military that are in the Department of Defense. The Coast Guard is not in the Department of Defense. And that should scare you more than anything, because now the Department of Homeland Security has military law controlling the United States Coast Guard that rests and resides as a quote-unquote special police force that can act as and is a branch of military. The individual who is prosecuting me in these proceedings, not as a naval officer, not as a federal maritime officer and graduate of Kings Point, a separate and distinct branch of service, they are prosecuting me as a civilian. This prosecutor is a JAG Corps, Judge Advocate General Officer Corps officer in uniform who is prosecuting me. And the judge who issued this order, he is a lieutenant commander retired or current lieutenant commander in the Coast Guard himself. He is also tied to commerce cases involving Iran that he ruled on. He also sat on cases called Brendan versus TSA, where he felt that a $700 fine for someone cursing in an airport was just fine and dandy. These guys are fascist. I do not know what better term, not corporatist, not a communist or socialist. You could take all those concepts and wrap it into one. One that I like to use is collectivist, but these guys are the very same type of individuals that did the very same thing in Germany, and I am not German. But when I see two vessels coming out from the Coast Guard that are named the Bertholf and the Vosch, I am extremely alarmed because I do know history. And Admiral Allen, who is a current U.S. Coast Guard Commandant, is married to Pamela Hess of Hess Oil. You have the regulator in bed literally with the regulated, unless they have not somehow consummated their marriage. I do believe that they have children. That aside, Pamela Hess is related to the former deputy Führer to Adolf Hitler, Rudolf Hess. I'm not making this up. You can go look at the names on the Coast Guard website of these two vessels and look at the billions of dollars in theft that is going on from the Coast Guard in the Deepwater program, the attacks upon American flag shipping. 97% of our cargo is now carried on foreign flag coming into and leaving the United States. That does not put us in a very safe position as to civil defense and national security. And because of my views and because of the information that I am trying to get out to the American people to consider, things like having port security, where President Bush wants to turn over the scanning of the cargo to a Chinese corporation that has the president and CEO of that Chinese corporation, who was second in command of the People's Liberation Army, which is the radical right-wing military arm of the Chinese government. He might as well have given scanning of our cargo over to the Chinese military. There is no difference. And those are some of the things that are going on. That is some of the information that I have been working to get to you while I have come under attack from the Coast Guard and Homeland Security, branch of service that I have never served in, and they are prosecuting me for the last 5 years. I want to, and I will do this in, we have another 30-segment show coming up. I want to get into and actually read this order, but I need to make it very, very, very clear to you to watch any state of emergency, no matter if it's city or local or state or national. And what's happening right now with the mortgage crisis, there's no reason that this will not grow, and if not even almost exponentially and instantaneously, into a national, if not international crisis. As California goes, so does the world. It is the 5th largest economy in the world. You've seen what's happened with the housing bubble in the 1990s. This goes way beyond that. And right now, to somehow, they're even using eminent domain, which is the right of the government to seize your property and pass it on to private interest, something that came out not only related to the World Trade Center and Silverstein, and trying to privatize that property, that enormous public trust, and the inherent powers of eminent domain, but also in Kelo versus Connecticut decision, a U.S. Supreme Court case precedents, that came out shortly after that, to where the United States wants to come in, and anyone who has defaulted on their home loans seize that property and sell it to get the market going, so that it's better to deprive these people of their homes, pull them out, sell it on the market, pennies on the dollar or at market value, put those people on the street, and only because Citibank has done a great job, and Citibank is tied to JP Morgan and a lot of these other foreign, international bankers, and they've come into the United States to recolonize it, recapture it, turn this back into literally a penal colony. That's why you see the rise of the military-industrial police state here in the United States. And you need to not only become more aware, but you need to resist in any and all lawful manner that you can. A very good book, and I always bring this out, it's called The Shield of Achilles. It was written by Philip Bobbitt. This individual, much like Bill Clinton, was educated at Oxford University in England. But in there he talks about the change in constitutional order, in the creation of a new constitution here in the United States, and that constitution is the North American Free Trade Agreement. If you look to Europe and what started before the European Union came about, it was the EEC, the European Economic Community, that eventually evolved, and some would say de-evolved or devolved into the European Union. And they are trying to do the same thing here in the United States, is to have a system of feudalism where it is self-appointed royal family rule who has taken the Commonwealth, who has taken the public trust, whether it be intellectual property rights, whether it be water rights, whether it be the military, whether it be the CIA, whether it be any and all assets of the government itself, and put them under family control. We go back not only several hundred years, but several thousand years. And it is something that our founding fathers stood against. It is the main reason why many people have come to this country, which is to be independent of Europe and independent of any foreign entanglements, like I believe it was Washington who said that. We need to realize what is going on, where it is coming from, so that as they collapse our economy, this is not coming from Wall Street. This is not just happening as in the Great Depression. This is being carried out meticulously, economic attack after economic attack, Even Jefferson and many of our founding fathers knew and understood the ramifications of economic warfare, and they used it against England and much of Europe to secure our independence. And now we have lost not only that independence, but that brilliant independent nature that built our country to keep it independent, to keep it separate and apart from foreign entanglements. And one important note is we need to remove the troops from Afghanistan. We need to remove the troops from Iraq. We need to prevent any and all kind of altercation or war, conflict with Iran, because all of this, everything I am enduring right now myself, everything that we are all feeling, whether it be at the gas pump, whether it be at the job, whether it be at your home, or dealing with what's happening with your home mortgages or anything else, it is all related to the very same beast, the very same thing that is coming from Europe, not just from Wall Street, and it is intent on subjugating, making us slaves again here in the United States, and we must stand against this and oppose it. Thank you. And I will get back into it in the next show, and I will actually read the notice and the status notice and order that has just come out that I have received today regarding the Coast Guard's prosecution of me as a civilian within a military tribunal. Thank you. You gave away the credits on that?
What do you mean?
You didn't put your name in there.
Yeah, I didn't have time to type them in, so I'm going to do that for the next one. It was just easier because it's
Yeah, no worries. Hopefully Mark won't be